Joan Chittister suggests we must be here to find enlightenment, and I recognize I have a lot to learn about just being present and getting out of my own way. I discovered this again as I was preparing to preach today's sermon on step 2 in our 12-part series on Karen Armstrong's book. I was excited when I found out I would be preaching on this topic because I read a lot about compassion and I think about it a lot, and I like to think of myself as a compassionate person. So my head filled with ideas. The chapter is titled Looking at Your World, and as I began to prepare, all my favorite authors came to me, and I was lining up some great quotes to share with you, reasons why we should practice compassion, tips and tricks for when we aren't feeling it, analyses on what it means to look at our world with compassionate eyes. But you know, no sermon is complete without a good story, at best an inspiring one. So I started to look for stories about compassion from my life, and immediately a host of clear and rich examples rushed to my mind of times I was not compassionate. More than feeling instantly like I was a compassion-challenged person, I felt suddenly as if I had nothing to give you. Not only that, but as a minister, I think I'm supposed to be an expert on compassion. So, looking again at my own history, searching more resolutely for stories from my experiences with family or my workplace or my engagement with the world, the 3 concentric focus areas that the book asks us to survey in this step, I still couldn't find the right story. Nothing came to mind that felt right. It was all simplistic or pedantic. It just didn't fit. So I started asking colleagues and parishioners for their stories and hunting for compassion stories in the news and on the internet. But the more I looked or asked, the worse I felt. The more I reinforced my desire to find the perfect story, the less able I seemed to be to find it. I was hitting up against my limitations, and in my frantic search, I wasn't resonating with compassion in my life or anywhere else. It wasn't until a friend listened with compassion to my tale of woe and growing stress that I finally realized I was looking straight at an experience of limitation, and that's exactly what step 2 is about. It's about taking inventory and looking at our lives and our worlds with an eye to what is not yet the way we want it to be. In the light of my desire to be unfailingly compassionate and inspiringly insightful, the places I lacked compassion and felt uninspired were thrown into sharp relief. Suddenly, I was seeing not much besides injustices I haven't fought, or nuanced words of caring I couldn't quite be able to articulate, or inspiring stories I couldn't find. It's funny how when we aspire toward new heights, the first thing we often notice is all the ways we're just not there yet. So one of the first lessons I take from all of this is that it is important to be compassionate about any lack of compassion we may begin to see when we embark on our journeys of growing awareness. The second is about getting out of our own way. When we let go of our solid ideas of what it means to be a compassionate person, there is more room to be present to what is actually real. I suspect that when we lay down expectations and bring openness to the inventories of this chapter, when we approach them not with judgment, but with curiosity, a lot of unassuming strengths and kindnesses will come to mind right alongside the places that are not yet how we want them to be. So let us then, in a curious and open frame of mind, begin to look at our lives. Karen Armstrong suggests we start with the family. This is an essential school of compassion, she writes, because it is here that we learn how to live with other people. This involves self-sacrifice because daily we have to put ourselves to the side to accommodate the needs of other people. And the close proximity of others with competing needs provides rich opportunity for forgiveness of other and self. I like that, rich opportunity. You can just feel it. You know, regardless, when your spouse doesn't unload the dishwasher in spite of promises to the contrary, or when your sister calls because she needs your help with something urgent and dramatic again, or when your child oversleeps and makes you late for a morning meeting. We might call these upsets and irritations, but as I say, Karen encourages us to call them opportunities. Last Wednesday, in the weekly class that accompanies this sermon series, we shared our initial thoughts on this second step, and someone suggested that it can feel significantly easier to offer compassion to a stranger than to a member of one's own family. We didn't get to the root of why that might be, but it did seem to resonate with people. Like when we might find it easier to listen to a coworker's troubles than to those of our spouse or parent or child. I do wonder why this happens. Is it because when we're really close to someone, we can't see the immediate impact of our caring? Or is it maybe that the consistency of another's presence in our lives makes us forget the fragility of our precious connections with them? Or is it maybe that bringing more compassion to those closest to us would require us to bring more compassion to ourselves, and that's hard. Either way, looking at our relationships with those who are closest to us can be a particularly potent avenue for our own transformation. So I ask you now, as Karen does in the book, how do you really feel about your family or those you are most close to? What are some of the ways that your family nourishes you? Is there a black sheep in your family, and how did that come about? Can it be rectified? What are your hopes and fears for each person you consider to be part of your family? These are questions it is worth taking time to consider, to savor, and to come back to even as we continue on our survey. The next concentric circle that Karen suggests we take inventory on is our workplace, an undertaking which brings its own unique challenges. It is here that we often refer to people by their title rather than their name, and where people literally become resources. At our jobs, we are encouraged to see people as vehicles to get work done, and our humanity or the humanity of the people we work with becomes explicitly secondary. And when we see people being rewarded for competitive and individualistic behavior, we learn that we must fend for ourselves if we are to be successful or well regarded. Bringing a compassionate attitude to the workplace can feel counterintuitive. As was mentioned more than once in Wednesday's class, if I am compassionate at work, won't I just get pushed over? Isn't compassion the same thing as being weak? These two are perfect questions to address in this step. So, I ask you, what is the difference for you between compassion and weakness? Is there a difference? What would it look like for you to be compassionate in your workplace? Do you think the repercussions would be positive or negative, or maybe both? What if other people joined you? And what if our sense of self or success came not from being seen as strong or successful, but from striving to be compassionate? More questions to ponder. Finally, in this chapter, Karen has us look at our nation and ultimately our world. But I think we need to be mindful about how we do this. In this outermost circle of our inventory, it can be tempting to intellectualize and to separate our emotional selves from the issues. We know, after all, what many of our societal problems are, and we, UUs in particular, tend to be very well educated about the difficulties of our day, and we have good ideas about how to begin to solve them. More to the point, many of us feel clear about what or who is standing in the way. I know I do. I notice when I watch the news and see spokespeople who speak, words come to my mind like ridiculous or unbelievable when I hear what these people have to say. But I wonder whether this kind of emotional distancing from the people with whom I disagree actually limits my thinking. What if I strove to be genuinely and open-heartedly understanding of what is driving these words that I so strongly disagree with? Might this create more space for fresh ideas? Pema Chodron, who's a prolific writer on Buddhism for Western audiences, emphasizes the importance of compassion for self and other in our approach to global problems. She often tells the story of a student of hers, a death row inmate named Jarvis, who was watching TV one day with the sound off. Other inmates kept yelling from the other cells to change the station. And first, he sees the Ku Klux Klan, and he says, "What are they doing?" And the other people yell to him what they're doing. Then next, on his TV, he sees people demonstrating, and he asks, "What are they doing?" And people from the other cells yell, "Oh, those are Greenpeace demonstrators." Then he sees all these people in a room in suits and ties, and he's told that that's a Senate meeting. And eventually he yells back, "Well, I've learned something tonight. They all have the same angry faces." Even when we're on the right side of an issue, Pema suggests, our lack of compassion for each other, whether expressed in anger or other forms, tend to only add to our current levels of polarization. So when we look at some of the questions that Karen Armstrong asks when we take this inventory, like, how compassionate are our penal and social systems? How does your nation treat immigrants and ethnic minorities? Or is there gross inequality between the rich and the poor in your country? Our challenge is how to embrace these questions in an open spirit, without blame, without anger, frustration, or impatience in our survey, as Karen urges. This came up too at our class as something that is challenging for people. After all, how do we not have anger, frustration, or impatience when we are feeling angry, frustrated, or impatient with what we see? What do you do with those feelings? There's a lot to work with. But this is what the rest of the steps of the program are designed to give us insights and tools to handle. This week, this chapter is an opportunity to see with new awareness all that is not as we might have it be. And next week, we take a look at having compassion for ourselves, which is a critical foundation for working with all that we now begin to see more clearly. Looking back over this step and its request for a broad review of our lives, I must say that working on this has been particularly poignant for me. As I am in a time of transition, saying goodbye to you, and saying hello to a new congregation and life in another state, I have found myself naturally taking inventory of all kinds. I've been noticing where I have met my goals that I've set for myself and where I haven't. I've been noticing all that I have learned from you and with you, both in ways I had expected, but also in ways that have been fresh and surprising. I have spent a year of being with you and working with you and sharing and laughing with you, and I find myself grateful and, yes, wanting to share something on my last Sunday that might leave you heartened in some small reflection of the way that you all have heartened me. What I will say to you is how much I have appreciated seeing and experiencing all the ways you are a supportive, learning, committed, humor-filled, thoughtful, and open-minded group. But lest you get too big of a head from all of that, I think any group can benefit from a good program on 12 steps in compassion. I didn't exactly know what I was getting into when I drove across the country to be here with you, but I am so glad that I did. I leave here with a new appreciation of each and every one of you, and if I cannot express it eloquently to you in person, please know that it is in my heart. And yes, the kindness and thoughtfulness that you so regularly show to each other and that you have shown to me help light the way on my compassion journey. May the strength and support of this community help you also on yours. My wish for all of us is that we may see ourselves and our worlds as they are, appreciating them in their everyday, ordinary beauty, seeing what is not the way we would have it be, and preparing to change what we can. May it be so, in genuine and open-hearted presence with each other and all of life. Amen.